And welcome back to Sports Plus. Sometimes the word legend is overused, thrown around so much it's become a cliche. But tonight we genuinely use the word and not the cliche. We are joined now on Sports Plus by the legendary baseball broadcaster, Caray. And
Listen, I got a question that. What's legend? What's legendary? That sounds to me like I might be dead.
No.
I'm still
You're
very much alive.
still going strong and a legend in this town and, of course, in Chicago. And I would like to begin at the beginning because you're a St. Louisan.
I was born and raised here. And I worked for the Cardinals 25 years. Then I didn't jump. I was pushed. I found myself in Oakland for a year, working for Charlie Finley. That's par for the course, although he was a wonderful man to me. Then I went into Chicago. I worked 11 years with the White Sox. I'm my 12th year with the Cubs. I lived there the last 24 years, and it's always a pleasure to have a reason to come back to St. Louis.
Let's talk about the beginning and your Cardinal roots. Do you remember becoming a Cardinal fan, and then when did that lead to broadcasting?
Well, I think everybody who was ever born and raised in St. Louis became a Cardinal fan. The Browns were here then, too, and they have that true minority core of 3,500 people every game, you know. But truly it was a St. Louis Cardinal town because for the same reason that Chicago is a Cub town, because all the big names that the youngsters have been associated with all were either Cardinals when I was growing up or Cubs now. In the case of the Cubs, it's because of day baseball. These little kids go to the ballpark, they get out, they're back home by 5:30 or 5:45. You can imagine the excitement, and they talk for an hour or two to their parents. Well, other than going to a game, I doubt many youngsters have much conversation with their parents anymore. But when you've been at Wrigley Field, you have so much to talk about, especially at that impressionable age. And so then when you grow up and you have children, the same thing happens. Generation after generation after generation. The Cubs have had built in naturally a marketing plan that the other clubs now are spending millions of dollars trying to develop. And all this is because of Mr. Wrigley, who originally owned the ball club. I don't know whether it was luck or whether he being a heavy guy in advertising chewing gum, maybe he was the first guy to really see the light. That if you gave the people something to watch every day, they'd eventually become a true fan. And that's the story we're going to draw. In Chicago, we're going to draw almost 3 million people with a ballpark that only seats 36,000.
And that's
figured out.
And that's with a team that hasn't won a pennant since 1945, which is really saying something about the Chicago fan.
Can you imagine that? And that's the first year I started doing the Browns and the Cardinals. In those days, in the two-team cities, you couldn't do the road game of one of the teams. You had to do the home game of the other team. And 1945, it shocks you to figure that not once since then has a traditional team like the Chicago Cubs been in the World Series, let alone lose it, even been in it.
Yeah.
We won 2 division titles, 84 and 89, but were eliminated in the playoffs. So you would think the law of averages would take care of you, because expansion teams that move from one town to another, have been in World Series. But the Cubs haven't. So you can imagine when the first time comes, and Lord, please let me be around when it happens, what it's going to be. It'll be something that's never been experienced before, because Chicago is a tremendous city, a tremendous sports city. It's a tremendous city for people. People in Chicago go out every night. They spend their money to eat and drink every night. They don't wait just for Friday and Saturday. It's a fun town, a great sports town.
As you look past, in the past, would you say Musial was the greatest player you ever saw?
Well, you know, I've said this forever. I've said when I first started broadcasting Cardinal games, because not that he was any particularly close pal of mine, but he's a real gentleman, a real leader. He led by example. He wasn't one of these guys that the press always picks out to be a leader of ball club because they yell the loudest. and you can hear him in the stands. That doesn't mean he's a leader. A leader is a guy like Musial that goes up there and shows his teammates what they should do to win the ball game. And he was tremendous. And as a matter of fact, what is it, 25 years since his career is over? He's still as fine a man and as great a civic man for the community as anybody could possibly want. He's just a heck of a guy. And I've seen them all. I've seen Ted Williams, and I've seen Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Henry Aaron, Willie Mays, all of them, all fine ball players. But I know you're going to get around to this, and I just want to tell you, I've broadcast a lot of exciting games. I've met all these ball players. I've talked about them. I've known them. I've been friends with them. But my thrill was when I was in Cooperstown, and I stood up there and I realized that I not only was getting an award there, as were some other, many more prominent people than me, the sudden realization that I was one of three generations all doing Major League Baseball at the same time. My son Skip, who is a great announcer in Atlanta, his son, who's my grandson Chip, who does the Orlando Magic basketball, did the Braves, and now is doing the Seattle Mariners television baseball. And that realization, it never has been done before, and it probably will never be done again. And probably the only reason it happened to me, because I was smart enough to get married the first time when I was only 8 years old.
But your enthusiasm about your job not only affected your family and Skip and Chip to get them interested in the business, but also affected so many people, particularly who picked up the Cardinal Broadcasting Network. And a couple of weeks ago, Stan Musial was at the White House talking to Bill Clinton, and the president was talking about the days he used to listen to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you know, that's a funny thing, because Monday night, I was at they have a Voices of Baseball. Kurt Smith wrote a book.
Right.
And they have Jack Buck's going to be there in a couple of weeks. Bob Costas there next Monday night. Mel Allen's been there, Ernie Harwell. And last Monday night was my turn. And one of the things that Kurt Smith did, who moderated the program, and they had about 1,000 people, and we all had a wonderful time, but he read the letter from Bill Clinton addressed to me. And he read the letter. And that meant that I had to have a letter from Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, Richard Nixon. I didn't get one from Jack Kennedy, but I did get one from Bobby Kennedy, who probably would have been president had he not been killed.
I want to talk about the near-fatal car accident you had in St. Louis. Not so much the car accident, but what you did on opening day the next year. People didn't even know if you'd be back, and there you were.
Well, I've been, naturally I was on crutches, but I have thrown away, and then on canes, and for maybe a week or so. And then opening night, I being a little ham in me, I start walking out with the two canes. I got halfway to the microphone. I throw one cane away. Everybody applauds. I get nearer to the microphone. Everybody's yelling, "Throw the other one away." I throw the other one away, and I get to the microphone. And but the fatal accident, I don't think too much about that. When I really chipped my life almost out of it, which really I came close to dying when I got a stroke. I was playing gin rummy at the country club in Palm Springs. And suddenly I couldn't hold my cards. I was sweating, perspiring, threw a little water on my face, came back, and one of the fellows was astute enough to know something was wrong. He had called a 911 number, and the next thing you know, I'm in the hospital there, Desert Hospital. And all of a sudden I realized I can't move my right leg, can't move my right hand, and I think I'm talking incoherently. And this is Thursday, and I went in on Friday night. And that's how long I've been in a coma. And of course, you can imagine my state of despondency. And I was sure my life was over. As a matter of fact, I wanted to die if I couldn't resume my life anyway. So my wife began to bring in, Dutchie began to bring in these boxes of mail. We stopped counting at 175,000, and we had just scratched the surface. And I don't know, medically, probably doctors will tell you that had nothing to do with it. But to me, the encouragement I got from these letters all over the country, places I never thought anybody even heard of me, but they were watching TV. And before TV, you know, when I first started, and when we did our broadcast on KMOX, there was no television. There was no team in Atlanta, no teams in Texas, no teams in California. And KMOX had 187 radio stations on the network. And so they heard me all over the country. So when I started doing a television for WGN, my name wasn't a stranger to people because they've been hearing me for a long time. And that probably had a lot to do with it. But that's the encouragement I got from reading these letters made me, in my heart, want to recover, want to get back. And do you know that in almost 50 years now, those are the only games I miss. From April to the end of May, that's the only time I missed an inning that I was supposed to do. So the longevity probably is the greatest talent I've had.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, we talked about legend at the beginning of this interview. I mean, as a broadcaster, you are so beloved in this country, and let's talk about that. And do you think the style that you have, being an announcer, you've always said you're a fan doing a game. Do you think the style has a lot to do with why you're so popular?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I started that style from the day I first doing a game, because as a fan, you know, when the main slugger on the team strikes out with the bases loaded, when a fly ball would have won the game, it's got to show in your voice. If you're a fan, I am. I've never gone to the ballpark with the idea of criticizing anybody. I want everybody on the team that I'm broadcasting for to get 3 hits, and I want the pitcher to pitch a no-hit game or at least a shutout. But wishing doesn't make it so. If he strikes out, if he makes the error, and even errors, I don't call the errors, the scorer calls it an error. But when a ball should be caught, the people know I think it should be caught. And especially now, in this age of television, how are you going to fool people and tell them what a great star a guy is that just struck out for the 4th time in a row with men on base and you lost by a run? You can't fool people. And actually, I think, and I like, baseball is a radio announcer's game where the announcer, through his own vocabulary, his own use of it, his own emotion, makes the fan either excited or not excited, makes him feel something special. Whereas television, heck, you can see what's happening. And I honestly believe everybody on television talks too much. My idea of the only guy who ever had a television style was a guy named Ray Scott, who did professional football for the Green Bay Packers.
Sure.
He always used about 1 or 2 words. Star is back, Horning running to the right, Taylor carries the ball, touchdown. And every guy came in the picture just as they mentioned a name. But everybody, listen to the broadcast today. That's the football broadcast, the basketball broadcast. You're watching, you hear nothing but talk. The picture tells you the whole thing, and especially in baseball. It's tough to develop a style in baseball as it should be, because if you don't talk enough, they think you're dead. They think there's no excitement in you. Well, I'll tell you one thing, nobody ever accused me of not adding to the excitement of any event.
Do you think more broadcasters should act as fans? A lot of broadcasters now are called technical announcers. They do a lot of statistics. Do you think they should be more emotional?
Well, you're talking about my pet peeve. Whoever thought, the ball clubs give you 10 pages of statistics. Now, you know very well, they're not going to give you a negative statistic. So everything that you are armed with is supposed to be favorable to the team. People are watching. I don't want to misrepresent myself, my credibility, the credibility of the program or the station. I like to talk about what I think the fans are interested in. You know, I make a big issue out of the fact I like to go to bars and restaurants and so forth. That's how I got the idea of opening my own restaurant. Now I got two of them, and it's great. I make a lot of money, probably even as much as I make out of broadcasting. But the point of it is, I like to go to bars, not to drink, but I meet people there. And when I meet people, they're the people who listen and watch. And I want to talk to them. I want to get what they're thinking about. I want to know how their mind runs. And everybody says when I'm quoted about I like to go to bars, the writer doesn't add what I've already told them about why I go there. And that gives you an idea of some of the kind of sports writing.
24 years now in Chicago. But how tough is it? How tough was it leaving the Cardinals?
You can imagine what a thrill it was for me, under my circumstances, my humble origin, to be doing the St. Louis Cardinals all these years, and to be a name that everybody knows and knew. And then here I am, I'm not going to be there anymore, and I did the most stupid thing I ever did in my life. I bought about $5,000 worth of stock when I was working for the brewery, and I bought it at the same price that you would buy it. But, you know, this is 40 years ago, or almost 40 years ago. And that stock doubled and redoubled and tripled and tripled, and stock dividends, yeah. And listen, Anheuser-Busch made me a rich man, and I should have thought of that. But in a fit of petulance, of hurt, I had Otis, the bartender at Bush's Grove, no relation to Anheuser-Busch, go across the street and buy a six-pack of Schlitz because it was a competitor, and I know that would burn them up if they saw me drinking a can of Schlitz. That was the only can of Schlitz I ever had in my life. I've never had another one since, no matter who my beer sponsor was, and I've had a lot of them in Chicago. In my refrigerator at home was Budweiser, and I just had to get that out. I've never been so ashamed as I am every time I think of that.
50 years next year in baseball. How much longer are you going to continue?
If I feel as good next year, God willing, if I feel as good as I do right now, I'm going to try for that second 50. I think that'd be fun.
Harry, thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you
been
very
a
much.
pleasure.